My boss looked me in the eye and said, "Just do what I say." So I did. I followed every order. I saved every email. I documented every shortcut. And when they fired me to protect themselves, I didn't argue. I didn't expose them. I didn't warn anyone again. I just stepped aside and let the audit finish what they started. When I got the offer, I remember sitting in my car for a full 10 minutes before starting the engine. Not because I was shocked, but because I was relieved. I had been job hunting for months, sending out applications into what felt like a black hole, getting polite rejection emails or nothing at all. So when this company called me back and said they wanted me in their finance department, I felt like I'd finally caught a break. This wasn't some shady startup or fly-by-night operation. It was a mid-sized company with a solid reputation, a clean office, and a leadership team that loved to talk about values. On my first day, HR handed me a welcome packet thick enough to feel important. Inside were glossy pages about ethics, transparency, and accountability. Those words were everywhere, in training videos, in hallway posters, even in email signatures. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. My role wasn't flashy. I wasn't closing deals or presenting to executives. I worked behind the scenes, reconciling financial records, making sure internal numbers matched external reports. It was quiet work. Detailed work. The kind of job where mistakes didn't explode immediately, they just sat there, waiting to grow. And I took that responsibility seriously. I showed up early. I stayed late. I asked questions when I wasn't sure. I wanted to be dependable, the kind of employee managers trusted without hovering. Over time, people noticed. My performance reviews were good. Sometimes even great. My manager would nod approvingly in meetings and say things like, "He's detail-oriented. Reliable." That word, reliable, mattered to me. I wasn't trying to climb the corporate ladder fast. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted stability. I wanted to do honest work, go home without stress, and build a future that didn't feel constantly at risk. That's why the culture mattered so much to me. When a company tells you they care about ethics, you let your guard down. You assume that if something ever feels wrong, you can speak up. You believe that doing the right thing will be supported, not punished. Looking back, that belief feels naive. But at the time, it felt safe. I trusted the systems. I trusted the people above me. I trusted that if I ever had a concern, it would be treated as a problem to solve, not a threat to eliminate. That trust is what makes the rest of this story hurt. Because the moment I started doing my job too well, I stopped being an asset and started becoming a liability, even though I didn't realize it yet at first, it was nothing dramatic. No flashing red flags. No obvious fraud. Just small things that made me pause for a second longer than usual before moving on. A number rounded when it shouldn't have been. An expense categorized a little too conveniently. Revenue showing up a bit earlier than the timeline justified. Individually, any one of those could be explained. Systems aren't perfect. People make mistakes. That's normal in finance. I told myself that over and over. So I did what I always did when something felt off. I checked again. I pulled reports from previous months and compared patterns. I ran reconciliations twice. Sometimes 3 times. I assumed I was the problem, that maybe I was missing context, or misunderstanding how things were done here. But the more I looked, the more consistent the inconsistencies became. They weren't random. They followed a rhythm. Adjustments always leaned in the same direction. Losses softened. Profits smoothed out. Nothing extreme enough to cause panic, but enough to make reports look cleaner, safer, more attractive than reality. That's when the discomfort started. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, the office mostly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing softly above me. I had spreadsheets open side by side, and my stomach felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. I wasn't scared yet. I was conflicted. Because noticing something like this puts you in a strange position. You don't want to accuse anyone. You don't want to be that employee, the one who sees problems everywhere. But you also can't unsee patterns once they lock into place. So I slowed down. I documented what I found, not formally, just notes to myself. Dates. Figures. Questions I wanted to ask later. I kept my tone neutral even in my own head. No assumptions. Just observations. Still, a thought kept repeating quietly in the background. If an external audit looked closely at this, they would ask questions. That thought wouldn't go away. I told myself I was being responsible. That this was literally my job, to protect the company by making sure the numbers were right. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't looking for wrongdoing. I was looking for clarity. The hardest part wasn't the data. It was realizing that if I was right, someone above me already knew. And if they knew, then my next step mattered more than I realized. I sat there for a long time, cursor blinking in an empty email draft, wondering how to say what I needed to say without sounding accusatory, dramatic, or disloyal. Eventually, I closed the file and went home. But I didn't sleep well that night. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about whether honesty actually had a place in that office, or whether it was going to make me a problem. And the next morning, I decided to talk to my manager. I didn't walk into my manager's office angry. That's important. I walked in careful. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head all morning, trimming out anything that sounded like an accusation. I didn't want to point fingers. I didn't want to use words like illegal or wrong. I just wanted guidance, clarity, something that would tell me I wasn't about to step on a landmine. I sat down across from him and said exactly what I'd planned. I might be missing something, I started, keeping my voice neutral. But I've noticed some reporting adjustments that don't line up with standard timelines. I just want to make sure I'm handling them correctly. I slid a printed sheet across his desk. Not a full report. Just a few examples. Clean. Professional. Non-threatening. He barely glanced at it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled sharply, and looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they didn't feel like dealing with that day. "This is how it's always been done here," he said. No explanation. No discussion. I nodded slowly and said, "I understand. I just want to be careful. If an external audit ever looked closely, they might." That's when his tone changed. He sat forward, eyes narrowing just enough to make the message clear. "You're overthinking it," he said. "And you're wasting time." The room felt smaller all of a sudden. I tried once more. Carefully. "I'm not trying to cause issues. I just want to make sure we're protected." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Look," he said, "I've been doing this a long time. You were hired to execute, not to question every decision. Just do what I say." There it was. That sentence landed heavier than he realized. Because it wasn't guidance, it was an order. And more than that, it was a warning. I nodded again, stood up, and said, "Okay. I just wanted to be clear." As I walked back to my desk, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not fear. Awareness. Up until that moment, I believed this was a misunderstanding. A communication gap. Something that could be fixed with the right conversation. That belief died in his office. What replaced it was something colder and more practical. If this ever went wrong, I needed proof that I hadn't gone rogue. That I hadn't made decisions on my own. That I had raised concerns and been instructed to proceed anyway. So I did the most boring, professional, non-dramatic thing possible. I sent a follow-up email. I summarized our conversation politely. I referenced the examples I'd shown him. And I ended with a simple question. Can you please confirm that I should proceed as discussed? I stared at my inbox, heart beating harder than I expected. 5 minutes later, the reply came in. 3 words. Proceed as instructed. I read it twice. Then I leaned back in my chair and understood exactly what I had just been handed. From that moment on, I stopped trying to convince anyone. I started protecting myself. That email changed everything. And I began documenting everything. 3 words shouldn't have that kind of power, but they did. Proceed as instructed. No explanation. No caveats. No room for interpretation. It was a green light, and a shield, at the same time. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel clever. What I felt was calm. Not relief. Clarity. From that point forward, I stopped asking questions out loud. Instead, I asked them on paper. Politely. Professionally. Always framed as confirmation, never challenge. Whenever my manager gave me verbal instructions, I followed up with an email summarizing what he said. Whenever adjustments were requested, I asked which account they should be applied to, in writing. Whenever deadlines were pushed or rules were bent, I documented the request and the approval. I didn't change how I worked. I just changed how carefully I recorded it. I created folders. Backups. Time-stamped files. Nothing hidden, nothing encrypted, nothing dramatic. If anyone looked, it would all seem perfectly normal, just an employee being thorough. Because that's the thing about documentation. When you start it too late, it looks suspicious. When you do it quietly and consistently, it looks responsible. Weeks turned into months. The office went on like nothing was wrong. Meetings about growth. Emails about company values. Leadership smiling in town halls, talking about how strong and transparent our systems were. Meanwhile, the instructions kept coming. Shift this to next quarter. Reclassify that. Don't worry about that variance. Every time, I complied. Exactly. No resistance. No commentary. No warnings. Just execution, and a paper trail that grew thicker with every passing week. Sometimes I wondered if my manager knew what he was doing. If he understood how exposed he was making himself. Other times, I suspected he assumed I'd delete emails, or forget details, or simply take the fall if anything went wrong. I didn't confront him again. I didn't need to. Because the company announced something that made my stomach tighten in a very specific way. An external audit was coming. Not a routine internal review. Not a casual check. A full, third-party audit. The kind that doesn't care about office politics or seniority. The kind that only cares about facts. And suddenly, my manager started paying attention. The email went out to the entire department early Monday morning. Please be advised that an external audit has been scheduled for next quarter. That was it. Short. Clinical. No emojis. No reassuring language. Just facts. I read it once, then again, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was something closer to inevitability. Around me, the office buzzed with low-level anxiety. People leaned over cubicle walls. Slack messages popped up with questions no one had answers to yet. Audits had a way of doing that, turning confident professionals into cautious ones overnight. My manager walked past my desk 3 times in the first hour. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything. But I could feel the shift. By the afternoon, the tone changed. Meetings were called. Calendars filled up. Suddenly, details mattered. Suddenly, accuracy was everyone's priority. And suddenly, my manager cared very deeply about the same numbers he'd dismissed months earlier. He stopped by my desk and asked casually, "Everything look good on your end?" I met his eyes and said, "I've been proceeding as instructed." The words hung there for a moment. He nodded, too quickly, and said, "Right. Good." Over the next few weeks, the pressure increased. He asked me to clean things up. He asked if there were any risks. He asked if I was comfortable with how things were documented. Each time, I asked for clarification. Not confrontational. Not accusatory. Just calm, written confirmation. What specifically would you like adjusted? Can you confirm which period this applies to? Do you want me to document this change in the same way as previous ones? I could tell it irritated him. He wanted reassurance without records. Comfort without evidence. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. The closer the audit got, the more restless he became. Late emails. Short replies. Meetings where he talked more than usual and listened less. He started hovering behind my chair, watching my screen like he was hoping something would disappear if he stared long enough. It didn't. One afternoon, he pulled me into a conference room and shut the door. "You don't need to be so formal about everything," he said. I kept my voice steady. "I just want to make sure I'm aligned." He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. Because the truth was, I wasn't making it hard at all. I was making it visible. A week before the auditors were scheduled to arrive, my calendar suddenly filled with a meeting I hadn't been expecting. HR. No subject line. No agenda. Just a time and a room. And in that moment, I understood exactly what was coming. That I knew I was being fired the moment I saw the room. HR had that look, neutral faces, folders already prepared, chairs positioned just a little too neatly. My manager was there too, sitting slightly turned away from me, hands folded like he was waiting for a flight announcement. No small talk. No easing into it. The HR rep cleared her throat and said, "Thank you for coming in on short notice." I nodded. She went straight into a script I could have recited myself. "Due to organizational restructuring, your position is being eliminated. This decision is effective immediately." There it was. No mention of performance. No criticism. Just a vague corporate phrase that meant you're inconvenient. I glanced at my manager. He stared at the table. They slid a folder across the table toward me. Severance details. Confidentiality clauses. A signature line waiting at the bottom like a trap. I listened quietly as HR explained next steps, access revocation, and how someone would escort me to my desk to collect my things. When she finished, I said calmly, "I'll need time to review these documents with my lawyer." The temperature in the room dropped. HR blinked. "Of course. That's your right." My manager finally looked up. "You understand this has nothing to do with," he started. I cut him off, gently. "I understand." And I did. They weren't firing me because I was wrong. They were firing me because I was documented. I packed my desk under supervision like I was a risk instead of a resource. People avoided eye contact. A few whispered, "Good luck," as if I were headed into something contagious. As I walked out of the building for the last time, I expected anger to hit me. It didn't. What I felt was strange, steady confidence. Because everything they thought they were burying with me, every email, every instruction, every confirmation, was already saved. And the audit was still coming. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end said, "Hi, this is one of the external auditors assigned to your former company. We were hoping to ask you a few questions." I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew I wouldn't need to say much at all. When the auditor asked if I had time to talk, I said yes without hesitation. Not because I was eager. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had nothing to hide. We met over a video call a few days later. 2 auditors. Neutral expressions. No accusations. Just questions, carefully worded and precise. They didn't ask me what I thought was happening. They asked me what I had done. So that's what I told them. I explained my role. My responsibilities. The reporting process. I described how I'd raised concerns early on and how I'd been instructed to proceed. I kept my tone factual, almost boring. Then they asked if I had documentation. I did. Emails. Spreadsheets. Timelines. Instructions in writing. I shared everything they requested. Nothing more. Nothing less. There was a long pause as they reviewed the files. One of them finally said, "Thank you. This is very helpful." That was the last time I heard from them directly. But I didn't need updates to know what was happening. Former coworkers started calling. Carefully at first. Then more openly. Meetings behind closed doors. Consultants brought in. Leadership suddenly unavailable. A few weeks later, the news became impossible to ignore. Financial statements were being restated. Regulators were involved. Penalties were announced quietly, then not so quietly. My manager was terminated for cause. 2 executives above him resigned before they could be removed. The company's leadership page changed overnight. I never celebrated. What I felt was something deeper than satisfaction. Validation. I had done exactly what I was told. I had followed every instruction. And when they tried to protect themselves by cutting me loose, they forgot one thing. Paper doesn't lie. Months later, I got a call from a different company. One of the auditors had recommended me, discreetly. I was offered a role with better pay, better leadership, and a culture that actually practiced what it preached. I accepted. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't emotional. It doesn't involve confrontation or exposure. Sometimes it's just stepping aside and letting the truth do what it always does when it's documented carefully enough. In the end, I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I didn't try to expose anyone in the moment. I just did my job, followed instructions, and let the truth speak for itself. Sometimes the quietest actions create the loudest consequences. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, it's integrity.